not skeptical about evolution. There's a common confusion outside of serious biology. I mean, natural selection is a factor in evolution. No serious biologist doubts that. But it's one of many factors. For example, mutation's a factor. I mean, there are many other factors. For example, if you just take a look at our own genetic endowment, a lot of it comes from transposition.
When you talk about the endowment, how do you say endowment?
When you're born with what?
Well, like
innate?
Yeah, but do you use the word endowment?
How do you spell it? Write it on the blackboard.
I don't know what you said. Endowment.
Oh, endowment.
Yeah.
Sorry, endowment.
Sorry, it's good.
So you think that we have a way to comprehend the world within ourselves, and we can only comprehend the world up to this limit?
That's just Hume. That's Newton and Hume. So you try to discover what is this cognitive endowment that we have. That it is a fixed cognitive endowment is not really arguable unless you think we're angels. But if we're part of the organic world, we have fixed capacities. Just like I can't fly. These capacities have a certain scope and they have certain limits. That's the nature of organic capacities. Then comes the question, okay, what are they? In fact, one of the striking things is what I just mentioned. Our cognitive endowment sort of compels us to regard the world in mechanical terms. We know that's wrong, but we can't help seeing the world like that. If you look at the moon rising in the early evening, at the horizon it's big, then it gets smaller and smaller. It's called the moon illusion. We know it's not true, but you can't help seeing it.
Well, I thought of it a lot, and I know it's one of the paradoxes, but I think our brain zoom. It's like if you see the world through a window which has a far distance, and you will see a bridge in the distance, and the window delimits your attention, then you would feel the bridge is much bigger than what it is.
I mean, now you're trying to give an explanation, and there's been a lot of work on what the explanation is. But whatever, and it's not so trivial, but whatever the explanation is, we can't help seeing it, okay? We just see it, just like we can't help thinking that the world works by physical interaction, contact. Some other part of our brain tells us it's not true because of theories that have been developed that say it can't work like that. But that can't change our perception and interpretation because that's just fixed.
Okay, trying to visualize, I guess it's not visualizable, but this endowment. So we see a tree and we understand it's a tree. Does it mean that our brain is equipped with a fixed capacity that tells us this is a tree?
Here's another question where it's good to be puzzled. How do we identify something as a tree? It's not so simple. So for example, you plant a tree, say a willow tree, which is a good example. It grows. At some point you cut a branch off it and you put that branch in the ground. Suppose it grows and becomes exactly identical to the original tree. I suppose the original tree is cut down. Is that new one the same willow tree? Why not? It's genetically identical, it has all the same properties, but we know it's not the same tree. Why not? I mean, and if you go further, it turns out our concept of tree or rock or person or anything is extremely intricate. And furthermore, see, here's what I think is just a classic error that runs right through philosophy and psychology and linguistics right up to the moment. That's the idea that words, say meaning-bearing elements, like say tree or a person or John Smith or anything, pick out something in the extra-mental world, something that a physicist could identify. So that if I have a word, say cow, it refers to something, and a scientist knowing nothing about my brain could figure out what counts as a cow. That's just not true. That's why you have classic books with names like Words and Object, Word and Object, Quine's major book, or Words and Things, or Roger Brown's major book. That referentialist assumption is simply false about humans. I mean, it's true of animals. Like, as far as we know of animal communication, yeah, that's actually true. But for humans, it's simply untrue. And furthermore, every infant knows it. And that poses a huge evolutionary problem. Where'd that come from? It imposes an acquisition problem, a descriptive problem, an evolutionary problem. It's never been looked at because everyone assumes, well, there's just a relationship. That's like assuming things move to their natural place. We're never going to have a real understanding of semantics unless those illusions are thrown out.
Well, something that always struck me since I was young is like you get a representation of the world by symbols first. Like logically, you would see a dog, and then you would see a drawing of a dog and make the connection. But in your life, you get exposed to a representation of a dog in a very actually simplified way. And then you go to the, or let's say, you go outside and you see a real dog.
The trouble is, that's not the way it works. Yeah, that's very commonsensical, just false.
No, I'm not. I'm saying it's how it's exposed. Like we what
it makes sense, and every work on philosophy or linguistics says exactly that. This just happens to be false. And furthermore, every infant knows it. Fairy stories are based on the fact that it's false. Like take a fairy story that any child understands.
No, I'm not saying the child believes it's a real dog. What I'm saying is that
that's not the point. We do not identify dogs in terms of their physical characteristics. We identify dogs, for example, in terms of a property of psychic continuity. Like if a witch turns a dog into a camel, and then some fairy princess kisses the camel and turns back to a dog. It's been a dog all along, even when it looked like a camel. I mean, that's the basis of fairy tales.
I was not saying that it's the way we understand it.
Psychic continuity is not a physical property. It's a property that we impose on things. So therefore, there is no hope for finding a way of identifying the things that are related to symbols by looking at their physical properties. They're individuated, they're identified in terms of our mental constructions. So they're basically mental objects. And that means the whole referentialist concept has to be thrown out. And you have to look at the relation of language to the world in some different fashion.
So, and do you think we constructed the world in mirroring this image we had in our mind?
We do it, but we don't do it the way philosophers and linguists think we do it. We certainly do it. So, for example, sure, we see the world in terms of trees and dogs and rivers and so on. But then the question is, well, what are those concepts? Now, the standard assumption is those concepts are linked to physical, identifiable physical things in the extramental world. And that assumption is just false. And unless we rid ourselves of that assumption, we won't be able to understand the way thought and language relates to the world. But that's a topic that's just taboo in philosophy and psychology. So they're stuck. They're like mechanics pre-Galileo, where everything went to its natural place. And as long as you keep to that for thousands of years, you're never going to understand the mechanics of the world. That's why I think these are the kinds of reasons why it makes very good sense to think back to the earliest stages of the scientific revolution. Not Einstein, that's too sophisticated. Let's go to the earliest stages where people had that credible intellectual breakthrough, and they said, let's be puzzled about what seems obvious. So why should we take it to be obvious that if I let go of a ball, it goes down and not up? I mean, it's sort of obvious, but why? Well, as soon as you're willing to ask that question, you get the beginnings of modern science. If you're not willing to ask that question, you say, well, it goes down because it belongs on the ground. No science develops.